Hello, and welcome to the Security Industry Association Vertical Insight Symposium on Data Center Security. I'm Ron Hawkins, Director of Industry Relations for SIA. The Security Industry Association is the leading trade association for physical security technology businesses. We have more than 1,500 corporate members, including manufacturers, integrators, service providers, and others. We provide a variety of government relations, learning and development, technical standards, networking, and other resources and services to our members, all of which can be found at www.securityindustry.org. And we are the premier sponsor of the ISC West and ISC East trade shows and conferences. As demand for data storage in general and cloud services in particular grows rapidly, so does the need for data centers. As at thousands of sites across the country, these facilities, each holding vast amounts of information, essential to the operation of businesses and organizations. Our 4 sessions today will take a closer look at both the physical security and cybersecurity challenges and solutions related to what has essentially become another component of critical infrastructure. It should be an informative and fast-moving 2 hours, so please remember that if you miss anything, we'll have a recording of the sessions available on the SIA website. Also, please remember during this event that we welcome your questions. So if you have anything you would like to ask our presenters or any comments that you would like to offer, please make sure to make use of the Q&A icon on your screen. Before we go any further, I do want to make sure to thank our sponsor, Ameristar. We greatly appreciate their support of this event and other SIA activities. Check them out at ameristarperimeter.com. To lead things off, we are excited to welcome John Lineweaver, Regional Security Manager at Meta. With more than 25 years of diverse and impactful experience in the security and physical infrastructure domain, John brings extensive knowledge and expertise to a discussion of insider threat programs. In his previous role as the Physical Security Manager for Next Era Energy, John helped shape the utility's physical security plan, ensuring compliance with the Federal Critical Infrastructure Protection Program. Currently, John leads a diverse team overseeing data center protection in the eastern region of the United States for Meta. John, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So here's a little bit of what we're going to cover today. In doing so, if there's any questions or you want to dial down on anything, we have about 20 minutes and 10 for Q&A, so I'll try to move rather quickly through the slides. And then if there's anything we want to elaborate on, in the Q&A, please send those in. I also pledge that if there's anything we don't get to today, that Ron can send some questions out, and we'll get to that as soon as we possibly can. So today we'll just give a quick overview on types of threat and attacks. We'll briefly explain the nation's state threats. We'll talk about the Joint Cyber Defense Cooperative, a little bit of the overview of some current warnings from CISA FBI. We'll mention the Disruptive Technology Task Force, and then we'll move into some mitigation steps, followed by resources and key components to a successful program. So, sorry, we're one behind Ron. I went a little faster than you. There we go. Thank you so much. Currently in data centers, we experience a lot of the same types of threats that most companies will do. So they're not specific to data centers. The threat is just heightened for us. Intentional acts where someone sets out to purposely cause harm to the organization. Unintentional, and that could be data being lost from or stolen due to negligence or just an error. Leaving something out where it shouldn't be doing, a lost laptop, a theft out of the backseat of a car, that type of thing. A negligent unintentional insider threat is really that carelessness, right? Is you exposing somebody to the third party actor, clicking on a malicious link or something like that. I don't think a day goes by where you don't get a bot that tries to reach out and connect with you on either LinkedIn or through other social media platforms. And if you're getting those through your text and emails, your data's probably been hacked somewhere. Third-party threats. This is typically something more like a business partner or a contractor that compromises an organizational security. Again, third-party threats can also be a result of negligent or malicious activity. The contractor didn't mean to do it, or the contractor meant to do it. We'll talk about a couple of specifics of those later on that occurred with some of the companies that are Fortune 500 companies today. The malicious threat is in a form of intentional insider threat, and this person intends to cause harm, either for personal benefit or as an act of vengeance. There's a whole slew of resources out there that predict the cycle of these types of events, and they're much like uh, the precursors of an attack. It's the same different types of things where they go out there and find that. And the key to detection on this is something we'll talk about a little bit later, and you'll hear it several times: is see something, say something. Collusive threat, is a subset of malicious insider threats, where one or more insiders are collaborating with an external threat actor to compromise an organization, and that's one of the most dangerous types of incidents that are out there. All right, we'll go on to the next slide. So nation-state threats. These are the most prolific ones at the current time. Your nation-state adversaries like China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran pose a significant cyber threat particularly through advanced persistent threat activities, or APT. China is currently targeting critical infrastructure networks. There's numerous cases out there where they have malicious malware that's installed in the controlled networks for utilities, not just power, but also water. They are persistent in these in the penetration of these systems. They publicly came out and said that they want to be the world's leading economic and technology superpower, and they're going to do it with whatever means that they have possible. The other reason they're also covering these threats is in case of attack or conflict in Asia. Right now, the big concern is if anything happens in Taiwan, that they'll launch the malware attacks. Russia is well known for engaging in cyber espionage, disrupting social, political activity, stealing intellectual property. They actually conducted a cyber attack against a SATCOM provider, Viasat's European network, and this disrupted the remote monitoring of 5,800 wind turbines in Germany and internet access across Europe. So that's a second player into that cyber attack in the control networks. That would be the similar type thing that we would experience if there was some sort of attack in our infrastructure as well. North Korea, their primary focus is on intelligence collection, cyber attacks, and this is the big one, generating revenue. They are well known for doing that, and there's several bulletins out there on you can find on either the DSAC or CISA on how North Korea is doing that. Iran has made significant leaps and bounds in their capabilities, and they're now utilizing sophisticated cyber capabilities to suppress not only social or political activity, but they're actually going out to try to harm adversaries and be punitive in some of their actions. Some of the backups on the cases that come out on here, you had recently 2 U.S. Navy sailors were charged with providing sensitive military information to China. The FBI had a sting that exposed defense contractors' espionage after the FSO and ISO identified an insider threat. A Massachusetts Air National Guard member was arrested by the FBI in early April in connection with leaking above top secret classified documents that were then later posted online. In May, research scientists at Yahoo stole proprietary information about Yahoo's AdLearn product minutes after receiving a job offer from Trade Desk, one of their competitors, right? That's just a highlight on that. Those aren't all related to nation state, but they are people with ties to nation state. All right, next slide. Okay, joint priorities from the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. This is something that's a great initiative that I think was long overdue for the U.S. to stand up. They are out there and they've created some priorities for 2024. One of their main priority is to discover and defend against malicious abuse by APT actors, particularly those backed by the PRC on against US-based infrastructure. And when I say US-based infrastructure, primarily that's the control networks that our utilities operate, their SCADA networks, and how they control their PLCs. They're also prepped to prepare for major cyber incidents, and that's to help state and local election officials secure their networks and infrastructure against cyber threats. They're tasked with measurably decreasing the impact of ransomware on critical infrastructure, especially the critical infrastructure. And they're geared to make measurable progress to a world where technology is secure by design. That's a whole nother topic we don't have time to get into, but that is where we should all be working to go to. And lastly, they're tasked with decreasing the risk posed by artificial intelligence to critical infrastructure. And that's an area where I think we all understand and believe that it's going to continue to grow and be in the forefront for years to come. Right, next slide. Here are some of the current warnings from CISA, FBI, and one of the most prominent call-outs was from FBI Director Christopher Wray. I think he did a fantastic job. If you Google him and look on YouTube, he did a fantastic speech to Congress. And at a time where Director Wray was getting punched from the left and right for all sorts of things, and I think he did a magnificent job of explaining that the actions from the PRC under so much pressure from other areas. His statement was, "There's been far too little public focus on the fact that the PRC hackers are targeting our critical infrastructure." Read that again, right? It's far too little focus, and it's been there for some time. It even came out when I worked for the utility over 7 years ago. There was some known attacks at that point in time, but they weren't very well publicized. And CISA Director Jen Easterly, she called out that PRC cyber threat is not theoretical. They're leveraging information from our government and industry partners. The CISA teams have found and eradicated some things such as Volt Typhoon intrusions into critical infrastructure across multiple sectors. CISA and its U.S. government partners also have gathered information that strongly suggests that PRC is positioning itself to launch that destructive cyber attack in the event of a major crisis. And that's what we talked about earlier, especially with Taiwan. But it's not just Taiwan. If you look across North Africa and other areas in the world, even South America, the Belt and Road Initiative that China's initiating, they are confronting us on every step. It's much like the Cold War of years ago when Russia and the U.S. used to square off with ships. Now it's China. The FBI, DSAC, and other agencies have jointly released cybersecurity advisories that outlines tactics and techniques and procedures commonly observed in Russian state-sponsored cyber attacks. And then critical infrastructures are becoming increasingly vulnerable to Russian cyber threats. And the reason for that is these nation-backed ones have the financing, the drive, and determination, and they get not just monetary, but they can get either technology or military advancements much faster than if they're homegrown in their own group. The Russian Foreign Intelligence Service has exploited publicly known vulnerabilities. So when you see those patches come out, warnings, take heed of those patches. A particular one that the Russian state-sponsored hackers have been using are compromised internet routers, and its Ubiquity Edge routers have been notoriously weak in that. Next slide. This is a great initiative here, the Disruptive Technology Task Force. Their primary goals are to protect U.S. advanced technologies from illegal acquisition and use by nation-state adversaries. Their focus is on investigating, prosecuting criminal violations, export laws, and enhancing administrative enforcement. They utilize real-time intelligence and advanced data analytics to counteract national security threats. They also foster partnerships with private sector, international allies, and coordinate law enforcement actions. Their primary focus in technology is AI, quantum computing, advanced manufacturing, biosciences, and any of these types of technologies that could threaten U.S. national security if misused. In the short period of time that they've been out there, I believe they prosecuted 24 cases. I'm not quite sure, but it's a little bit over that number. So we'll move on to mitigation steps. All right, these are the important things, and there's a resource slide at the end, so you don't have to take notes. But in that slide, it particularly mentions the Carnegie Mellon Institute. If you just go on their websites, you can basically build an insider threat program from the free resources that they have. The reason these resources are free is they're federally funded research center, and they do magnificent work. Your biggest threat mitigation is having a robust insider threat program. A key to that is executive buy-in and partnership with your NetSec team, your human resources, and your security department. You really have to have that triangle approach. Actively participate in drills and exercise. Remember, no plan survives first contact. Anytime you have a tabletop or a drill, you'll probably take away a couple of things that I wish we would have thought of that. Well, you did, and you thought of it before an incident. See something, say something. Your workforce is a force multiplier for your insider threat program. I won't tell you what company, but there was a recent event where a CW, a contract worker, actually went in and did some malicious activity. It was detected, and when the investigation uncovered, people felt uncomfortable about that person, but they just didn't report it. A key component of your insider threat program is having confidential reporting in there. Partnership with federal agencies. It's imperative you know the key points of contact before an incident. Trying to find that number when all your systems are down are crazy. Everybody laughs at you if you have a pad and paper today or a Rolodex, but business cards don't get lost when your network goes down. Network with your peers to benchmark. It's important that you guys are all out there. We are all out there benchmarking against our peers to find out what we're doing, and to ensure that we share best practices with that. Stay informed. If you're not a member of the DSAC, become a member. If you're not eligible, there's other resources. CISA, DHS, and CERT are also all great resources for cyber alerts. All right, and then we'll move into resources. So quickly, here's a couple of the ones you just want to take note of. And again, any of this information that you'd like to see, just reach out to Ron, and he'll get you a copy of this. I don't know if we have time to read through some of these titles, but they're self-explanatory. The big one I want to go over next is the key components, and then we can move to a quick Q&A. So these are your key components of the program, and rather than spending time reading it, just if you Google, and the link's embedded in the presentation, but if you Google 13 key elements of insider threat program, that can be found on the Carnegie Mellon website. Daniel Costa and Randall, and I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but they were fantastic. It's a great blog, and they published it in October 23. It was a fantastic blog that outlined the key components of an insider threat program. Again, all that information is free. It's out there. They have been a magnificent resource. If you just do these if you just do these 13 key components, you'll have a great basis for an insider threat program. And I think with that, we have 9 minutes left for Q&A, so we can move to a Q&A. Reach out to me if you want to connect. And again, Ron can make this presentation available to you.
All right, thanks, John. Great information. And yeah, definitely encourage people to take advantage of that information there on the last slide and the resources on the previous slides. So a few questions. What role do you think AI will have in hacking and defending against hacking?
So my opinion is the threat is only developing in that area, and it will continue to develop. Advancements in AI are taking what we used to be able to do in 6 months to a year, and they're moving them up into days and weeks. So the advanced threat that's coming out there, it will get better. On the plus side of that, AI is also learning the intrusion natures of these things, and you'll see the counter software implement AI as well. So there'll be some sort of balance on there. But just as everything out there, there's a learning curve, and the adversaries have the edge unless we take these steps.
Do you see that becoming kind of an AI arms race between bad actors and the good guys?
Primarily because there's financial gain or technology advancement gains. So anytime that there's a financial tie to it, I would see that advancements are certainly going to be there, and that will be a continuing threat.
From what you've seen, how common are the key countermeasures? So are people actually doing this stuff, or are they things that look good on paper but not getting implemented enough?
I'm actually surprised at a lot of the organizations that we've done with, and I've been shocked. There's a fantastic level of professional practitioners out there where I see a lot of the problems are the buy-in from the executive levels, and it's one of those intangibles where they can't see the value right away until something happens. So sadly, I don't see this as prevalent, but it is on the uptick, on the uprise. I've done a couple presentations, and it's kind of shocking when some of the companies come up and say, thank you. We don't have this resource or whatever. It's pennies on the dollar when you look at a cyber incident. So I think it's on the uptick, and I hope it keeps going.
Right. All right. In the context of insider threats, what role does monitoring physical access to sensitive areas within a data center play in identifying potential risks?
It's key. Least privilege access. If you're not using it, I highly recommend you use that. That incident with the CW, that was able to pinpoint the exact time and location of something. And I don't want to elaborate. I apologize, but I don't want to name the entity. And but it is a key component of that. But if you're not implementing least privilege access, I highly suggest you do that.
All right. And let's see here. Is it likely for there to be more overlapping responsibility between government and private sectors in terms of how individuals get screened, hired, and cleared for work?
I think that's imperative, right? There's public-private regulations, obviously with human resources, there's always going to be some of these things. The inability for us to share information about people who perpetrated or allegedly perpetrated acts is always going to be in there. But I think it's imperative. These organizations are not the organizations they were 20, 30 years ago. Hey, we're here from the government. We're here to help. And, everybody runs away, hides their data. They're fine men and women that are out there now, law enforcement agencies and some fantastic cyber people they've been able to retain, sorry. So I think that's on the uptick, and I think it's crucial to the success and defense of insider.
Well, I don't know if you'll be able to answer this one or not, but are you using computer vision for physical security?
Unfortunately, I don't know that term yet. Um, I do know that we have some products that we use. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar in that
All right. Well, I guess to broaden it, are you using AI for AI solutions for physical security?
unfortunately, with Meta, my role is limited to physical security, and so I'm not aware of what our NetSec team uses,
Yeah,
and they may be hesitant to let publicly announce that, but I apologize on that.
no, that's fine. All right, but speaking of physical security, what is the role of convergence here with physical and IT security?
So I've been pleasantly surprised. I remember starting in the industry years ago, and all we heard about for about 15 years was the convergence, and it never happened. And then all of a sudden, overnight, people woke up and said, "Oh wow, we do need to tie in." In my current role and in my last role, it was crucial that we partnered with our NetSec team, and because all of our equipment runs on their backbone, right? And so anything that we do or say can cause some adverse effects to their network, and that partnership is crucial to understanding what technologies we can implement that won't impede their operations or pose undue risks. You don't want to be the person that asked for some ports and services to be opened up and a virus gets in. So it's crucial.
So we had the question earlier about government and private sectors and overlapping responsibility. How involved are you in public-private partnerships?
As often as I can. Unfortunately, my partner in crime, Charles Marciata from QTS, we've done a couple of presentations together. We've attended DHS events, the DSAC events, and I found it's just amazing. I've met so many professionals due to these organizations, and every one of them are laser focused on preventing these types of incidents. So it's crucial.
Do you have a sense of I don't know where the threat is going at this point? Is it just going to keep increasing exponentially? Do you ever get discouraged by what you see?
Discouraged, no. Yes, it's going to continue. Again, whenever there's financial ties to it, if we didn't have financial ties, the FBI wouldn't be in business, right? I mean, that's their bread and butter. They do white collar, probably white collar and fraud, medical fraud are one of their highest growing things. The shift in organizations away from physical crimes to cyber crimes, it's all not victimless, but it's not as sexy, and the rewards are higher. So it's going to continue. Device in the middle, person in the middle, those types of attacks are on the uptick, coupled with the nation state actors. This isn't going away anytime soon.
All right. All right, that does it for our questions. Any parting remarks before we go?
Well, thank you for listening today. Hopefully, I passed off some good information. If you want anything else there, please reach out to me, or connect on LinkedIn. And just happy to be here. So thanks for attending.
All right, thanks so much, John. Really appreciate it, and thanks for taking the time and presenting this great information. All right, so moving on to our next session, I believe Amy, William, Will, and David are all here. All right, excellent.
Everyone.
All right, looks like we have everybody. So next up, we're going to have a panel discussion looking at the physical threats that data centers face. And we'll start with some introductions. So I'll ask each of you to do that. So Amy, if you don't mind, we'll start with you.
I do not mind. Thank you, Ronald. I am Amy Dunton. I am currently with the Maristar Perimeter Security. I've been in the data center industry for about 30 years, doing everything in the data center, and have been in physical security for the last several years, focusing mostly on that. And I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Will, do you mind going next?
Well, hey everyone. My name is Will Kinnear. I We're the senior manager for information security and data privacy at iPro Americas. I've been in cybersecurity for about 20 years now. I worked for the NSA for a long time, doing cryptologic warfare for them. And then I came over to the private industry a couple of years ago. Absolutely love it. Very interesting to kind of have that shake up and see how y'all conduct your business and all that good stuff. Been involved with SIA now for the last couple of years, and I'm a member of the SIA Cybersecurity Advisory Board. And I'm very excited for this discussion today.
All right, thank you, Will. David.
Hey, my name is David McWhorter. Many years ago, I worked with DHS in helping them put together the Safety Act program. I'm pretty sure we'll have a question on that later. So at that point, I'll give a brief overview of what that is and why it's important. But I'm not, I don't have decades of experience with data centers or even cybersecurity per se, more the physical security side. But hopefully in discussions, we can continue to connect those two things as important to have overlap.
All right, thanks, David. And I think William might be having some problems with his video, but William, are you there?
You are correct. But give me a moment. Yeah, William Plant. I'm Director of Strategic Development and Consulting for Everon Solutions. Had to be here talking about data centers.
All right, great. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we'll start off with kind of a broad question, but obviously data centers deals essentially with digital information, but let's look at the physical aspects, starting with the perimeter. So what are some of the key considerations for perimeter security of data centers?
Yeah. So do you want to go ahead and I'll
No, go ahead.
It used to be that a lot of the data center concerns, or even critical infrastructure, really, they had a certain stop point, right? Which is, you get me to the fence, maybe I can clear some brush and vegetation beyond that to give me better lines of sight. But that's basically, as far as the concerns used to be. We're dealing with clients now in the last couple of years where they want to be able to have a situational awareness well beyond the hard fence line. And so being able to use, as you mentioned earlier in the conversation, computer vision-based perimeter detection solutions, but also to broaden the non-physical systems like monitoring social media and other kinds of tools that allow you to have a better organizational awareness around the greater community. That's been one of the trends that we've seen in a couple of clients that we've been working with.
Interesting. All right, Amy.
Yeah. So to expand on that, being in this industry for a very long time, which is hard to believe because I'm so young, but things have really changed in a lot of areas in data centers. One of them is just the amount of data that we are consuming, and also the way we're building data centers. It's now speed to market, everybody's fast. And with the increase in computer vision type of solutions, it's also tied into cybersecurity as well. But one of the things to expand on what William was saying is that it was, hey, we'll get the fence and kind of go from there. And so many of the other solutions that are coming up now are integrating within that perimeter security as well. When you're talking drones or you're talking perimeter IDS, you're talking cameras, lighting, it really is more of an integrated solution. And that's been a really big change that I've seen just in the way we're building. And we used to build maybe one or two or a handful of buildings in a market. And now we're buying 600 plus acres and building campuses in 10 buildings, and tenants are changing and their requirements are changing. So it really has started a conversation of looking at what the threats are, as John had alluded to earlier, and how we can protect our people and our data. So it's been a real shift in a rapid shift in how we protect the perimeter.
Right. So
I see.
David.
Sorry, Will, you want to go ahead?
No, go for it, David.
I was just going to say, from a physical security standpoint, where I come from, I think of three zones. There's inside the building, there's the building to the fence, and then there's the fence outward. Um, and there's not that one of those is more important than the other, but I do see that more inside the building physical security uh, becoming more important, just like our previous speaker talked about with insider threats and things like that. But also at the fence line, because the folks working at the fence line are insiders, and there's a potential threat there. So, on both inside and outside, it's cyber and physical, and it's interesting to see how they sort of play catch up with each other as time moves on.
I think Amy painted a very interesting picture where you talk about 600-acre data centers or maybe just the land that surrounds them with the data centers inside, and you almost have this like visualization of how in the world do I secure all of this, right? And it's the physical security, and then it's the cybersecurity too. And then you go walk around an event like ISC West or ISC East, and you see everyone is selling a sensor of some kind, right? A sensor to tell when there's people that are badging into your facility, a sensor to tell if there's people loitering outside, a sensor to tell if somebody left a bag, a sensor to tell if someone's vaping, a sensor for everything, right? And on the cybersecurity side, we have the same thing, a sensor to tell when somebody's accessing the network or when someone is, team viewing in or whatever it happens to be. There's just a sensor for everything. And it's like this madness of IoT and IIoT that surround us. But one thing that I have noticed is that a lot of these sensors are not built with a lot of good cybersecurity background behind them. It's, developers make these things to work, and oftentimes they do work, but security is usually kind of an afterthought. And so this whiz bang feature that you added to deploy drones to go and look whenever there's a shot or whenever there's an anomalous noise or whatever person detected now is introducing this bigger vulnerability into your network. And oftentimes I'll ask these vendors when I'm walking around, like, hey, what is this running off? What platform is this running off? Well, it's a Linux kernel that's 5 years old. It's built off an Apache version that's 10 years old. It's using Java background
Nice.
that's 10 years old and unpatched. And like we see this kind of stuff all the time. So I think it's an interesting kind of dichotomy because we deploy these sensors to make ourselves more secure and then end up making ourselves a little bit more insecure in the meantime.
Well, that's a great point that you bring up, and the phrase that you had said is this kind of the security is an afterthought. I have been in this data center industry for a very long time, and currently at a data center conference, and the constant conversation is how do we get these built faster, more power? How do we maintain power? How do we cool? How do we do everything? And I always raise my hand and say, well, are you integrating and bringing in security into the conversation? 9 times out of 10, if security is in the conversation, it is cyber security, but it's not necessarily in the components of the new perimeter security, whether it's the drones or whether it's the perimeter IDS, that's still not tied together. But somebody on a panel literally said, well, yeah, that's kind of stuff nobody cares about. And I held my composure, but I really believe we have to come back to the why. Why are we doing this? Why do we need security? Why are we building these buildings and these data centers? And what's going in it? And why are we keeping them up? We have the uptime. Why? To keep the world running. We all figured out what happened when the CrowdStrike and Microsoft glitch happened, and we were, as a globe, pretty much stopped. And so it really is important. And that's one of the benefits of having conversations like this, right? Is when you have some more of the thermal imaging that's coming up with perimeter IDS. And a lot of those in the past would give an alert for everything. So a lot of the feedback we were hearing is, well, yeah, but it alerts on everything. So it's just more. And if we look back in the history of a lot of breaches that happened, you get alerts, and nobody's paying attention because it's constant. So there is that conversation where everybody needs to be involved and understand the importance of the entire ecosystem, not just one component, not just physical, not just cyber, and not just perimeter, but inside as well.
Absolutely. And one piece of advice I would offer to everyone out there who's, maybe in these discussions where they're working with different vendors or whatever it is to deploy, these new features is, develop a checklist. And if you need help with that, I'm more than happy to help out. But do that vendor screening basically and say, hey, what are you doing to look for vulnerabilities in your software, or what are you doing to remediate those vulnerabilities once they're found? What is your patch cycle? That kind of other stuff, and do those vendor assessments. NIST is a great vendor assessment if you ever.
Yeah, if I could just jump in with one comment, it's interesting, Will, because when the Mirai botnet attack occurred and after that dust settled, I was brought in to do a system end-to-end evaluation plus an organizational assessment. And we determined that nobody ever really cared about the physical security systems. They had been really left to, let somebody else worry about that. We don't want to, that's not core to us, we'll let it. And we found so many disparate problems, but all culminating in this one huge vulnerability that was obviously exploited. So it emphasizes and underscores everything you've mentioned, and Amy as well, that it's got to be a enterprise risk level issue to deal with, because the moment you've lost a physical security system, whether you like it or not, you've actually opened up vulnerabilities that you cannot afford. And imagine what it's like for a COLA. You got an operator that's trying to operate a COLA in one way, and they've got all kinds of SLAs to operate security for a variety of clients. It's not easy. And so dialing yourself in, making sure that you've got some of these programs in place, you will do yourself a favor when all of a sudden you've been hit with a Mirai bot-like attack or something else.
Yeah,
that's a great point, William. I work a lot with MTDCs, and yes, it's really kind of lost on the impact of what the SLAs are and what the requirements are versus what you're actually putting in, because along the line, nobody's really security minded. And I think too, looking at certain programs, and I'll kind of throw this to David as well, when we talk about Safety Act certified, and having that be a part of the conversation. And if you can talk a little bit, David, about how it's very difficult to talk about it without sounding like a Geico commercial, but you can actually save money on premiums or insurance with certain products. So I think that's also an important component of this discussion when you're talking vulnerability and threats.
Yep, quite fair. Quite fair.
I've got a real quick, in the Navy, we call them C stories. So William was talking about the Mirai botnet. So for those of you who may not be familiar, a botnet is basically an attack where a centralized server takes over a whole bunch, usually thousands of other devices. And by the way, IoT and IIoT devices are perfect for this, because all you really need is a processor and an IP address, and you're in business. And what they do is typically they use these bots to then just send traffic to an attack or to a victim to kind of flood them out with all this traffic. Well, I was consulting with a client who was interested in purchasing some iPro products, and they had a set of cameras that were susceptible to the Mirai botnet, and they haven't patched them in a long period of time. And so we started getting in there and looking at their network logs, and sure enough, they were infected. So here in 2024, they were infected with the Mirai botnet, and were actively attacking other devices whenever they were called upon. And so it goes to teach you, like, you have to patch these devices. That was updated. And by the way, that was not one of our products that was doing that. But these devices are attractive to attackers. And if you're not going in there and updating your firmware, if you're not protecting them properly, chances are attackers are going to want them.
All right. So in terms of physical security, obviously there are any number of potential physical threats, but there's one in particular I'd like to ask about, just because it's so challenging and so difficult to deal with, and that's drones. So at this right now, the law is that you can't really do a whole lot besides identify and try to track down the operator. But how do you deal with that threat?
I can give a start. So you're right. Until you're allowed to shoot these things out of the sky, which I'm certain will never probably happen. A couple of principles that we've helped some organizations with is to really know that their drones are in and around your your building or your facilities. And so there's a variety of technologies that will do that. There's a really good product that one of the manufacturers is developing right now. I've seen a preview of it, where it's complete, total computer vision based anomaly detections, a drone detection. So the first thing is there a drone in your area that you need to know about, whether it's above your property or not? And so there's some great computer-based vision development that's going on. I think within several months, you'll probably see some initial products in that area. That's pretty cool. The second one, and this is one that we've just become more engaged with, although just for the security view, is around EMF design, right? The idea of, do you need to put a Faraday cage around some or all of this facility? And when we started working with a client that wanted to do that, like, we'd never done that. We don't do that specifically, but that we need to know that it was something that they were interested in. So, because the idea is that no matter what, if you can't take a drone out of the sky legally, then you have to assume that they will be there, especially with a number of the AI-based data centers. And the only thing you can do is to muffle that EMF signature as much as you possibly can. The third one is I think, is just to have a really good relationship with your local PD, that if you've got critical infrastructure facilities and they're convinced that, yeah, that's what you are, and somebody's operating a drone, it can be not malicious, right, but just people that are being goofs doing that. But it's a legitimate business or intelligence collecting tool. That's just a fact. And so assume that they're going to be sniffing, and if you have a real concern, there's services that will tell you who's and about where they're operating the drone. PD might be open to swinging by and saying, "Hey, Amy, how about that drone? What are you doing?" Right, just to kind of discourage it. That's a couple of things that we've been dealing with and helping. Amy, what do you think?
Yeah, and there's also the component too of using drones as part of your security protection. Yeah. There has been maybe less conversations, I think, until we're really able to understand what the laws are around that, right? So there have been, I just was asked this yesterday too, or talked about it yesterday, of like, we want drones to kind of come in, and our own drones as the operator, as a security measure. And then you have—
it'd be a real shame if your drone crashed into their drone, right? That'd be a shame.
Yeah,
right. Right? Yeah.
It's like a real game of
chicken with the drones, right? Exactly.
Not going to be policy, but it's an interesting situation.
Yes, definitely an interesting situation. And I think too, when it comes back to some of the AI and computer vision solutions, AI is also still, while quite old, still quite new, and regulations around that are still being determined. Heard a gentleman talking, and he was a keynote for a conference, and he had said it's kind of like giving, a 16-year-old driver the keys to your, Ferrari.
Yeah.
Like it's really still kind of too new to really determine what regulations can be there. But there is also the conversation is what AI, and what do you mean by AI? I liken that to when everybody is going to the cloud. But what does that mean to you? Mm-hmm. And what does the use of AI mean to you? Is it thermal imaging, and I can identify the human but not the dog the human is walking, right? Or tracking certain things versus robots going to take it.
Yeah, to your point, I'm aware of two, and we work with one. I'm aware of two large, like very large, logo that are they've either purchased it or they're evaluating drones. And the ideal is that you can operate drones on your property completely independently and let them do what they want to do. But you're right. The industry, the FAA especially, has still got a little bit of, I'd say, catching up to do. There's a lot of advocacy going on by drone manufacturers and some of the drones as a service offerings that are working closely with the FAA and others. It's just going to take a little bit of time. But I will say, if they're willing to make the investment in the infrastructure and the training and operate it themselves, there are some fantastic solutions that are purpose-built to protect a facility like a data center, and to, hey, there's a drone coming my way. if it gets in the way of me, well, that's too bad. But to your point, I think within the next 12 to 18 months, there'll probably be significant development on the legislation side that makes it easier for certain operators to do certain things with drones.
All right. So with all these threats out there, are there certain best practices that data centers can look to? And William, I'll stick with you on this one. But are there guidelines, best practices that can help people deploy their security solutions?
Yeah, I'll do this very quickly and swing back to the team. Yeah, when we're working with some of the smaller startup organizations, especially, and we've done full program development, there's the 5 things that I think of is the critical infrastructure security consulting and engineering community. Those folks should be so busy that getting them on the phone should be difficult. They should be cutting their beards off. And I know one guy that did, because he just said, okay, like, I'm seriously now, I'm gone 40 hours a week. But I would say that especially if you're a startup to a mid-tier and you don't have resources to do your own qualified risk evaluations, especially under an ESRM program, hire a security consultant that's established in the critical infrastructure. No matter what we've done with organizations, if we are called in to look at a program, we'll say right off the bat, start with an evaluation, a good security consulting evaluation. That's a good one. And I'm a big proponent of technology planning. I despair when I see, to your point earlier, it's a 5-year-old system that's unpatched and it's operating a Windows XP. I saw that one time, right? So always have a forward-looking plan. It doesn't have to be especially complicated, but make sure that your organization has an understanding of your vision. I think that's going to be important. And the third one I would say is go ahead and create that situational extension of your hard perimeter as far out as you can. I'm a big believer in integrated systems for a variety of reasons, but especially if you're looking at what some of the video AI folks are developing around computer vision, especially that having an integrated system that allows either bolt-on or further development in those spaces, you save yourself so much time and energy. Amy, to your point, right? Because you mentioned, was it David? Just bulk clear alarms, and it doesn't have to be that way, especially with AI. And then the last one, which I interviewed somebody for this when we're talking about physical security safety, and this fellow said, do not underestimate the risk that's brought around because of fire life safety systems. That they're supposed to be installed in a certain way, but the tolerances in the data center are so high, they're required to be much more stringent than a standard manufacturing environment. And very often they're not installed correctly. As a physical security guy, if I were in a data center today, I'd go to my fire safety guy and go, let's do an audit on these, especially the VESDA. Those are the ones that you got to be a little bit concerned about because critical dependence on their function. But if they're not set correctly, you'll have a fire and never actually know until it's way too late. So those are my 5 top ones just off the bat. But Amy and I were exchanging some information on this. So Amy, I'm sure you've got a bunch of them.
Yeah, yes. One point I'm going to make on even just like the fire life safety is, and it was brought up earlier too, of just engaging like the local municipalities, not even just police, but the fire departments as well, and bring them in and invite and show them around, because the last thing you need is there's a fire and the fire department comes in and just sprays water everywhere. You kind of want to avoid that. So just again, making sure that they are involved. And one of the things that has been very interesting to me and a passion of mine, and something that again William and I have been talking about, but there are kind of standard practices and maybe guidelines, and really looking to engage with partners that can help take the guidelines into what is right for you. Because just kind of saying, having a perimeter fence. Okay, great. Well, you don't want chain link, what kind of fence?
Yeah.
And what is it right for what we have in the data center, or cameras, right? Or perimeter IDS or lighting. And then also remembering too, that when you're adding that in, anything with an IP address is hackable. So making sure that there's that communication with cybersecurity and physical security. But as
Yeah.
far as kind of best practices, it would be for me, again, like engaging all of the team members and
All the
making
team,
sure
yeah.
that you are looking at specific solutions for because the guidelines can be so general.
Really broad, yeah.
You can look at it and be like, okay, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? And then utilize
the
resources
last thing I'll say
and-
about it is that I'm going to go back to a comment that John Lineweaver mentioned around creating best practices and sharing them. Yes, but, and then to your point, getting best practices can be pretty broad, but also they're very specific to the client or to the organization that developed them for themselves. And my point is that there was one time, going back to the C story analogy, where I received the design for a data center, and this was a data center operator. They were building their first. And in a few minutes going through the design, I went, well, they didn't produce this design. They had an engineer do it. But I said, this is X company's design. I recognized it, right? The components were there, the way in which the access flow and control was there. But I said to the client, how do you think this is going to work? Like, let's just do an access flow and control. And we went through and they said, why'd they do that? And I said, well, because the data center that this was designed for an agency, not a commercial client. You're getting national level protection for what would be a commercial colo. Because I don't want that. And I said, that's right. So we fixed that. So my point is that if you're going to share best practices, you must always contextualize what you're getting for yourself, be very thoughtful and rational about it. Ask for help, because a lot of people can help you with this, but don't just take and go, good, I've got my standard now, and that's what I'm going to do, or I've got my guidelines. You will absolutely sometimes overpay or under design. Both are risks.
Right.
Yes,
Sure.
and I think to add on to that, when you are in the design phase, is we'll never know what technology will be in 5 years. We couldn't have predicted in the last 5-10 years what we have today, but taking into account the ability to adapt, to grow, and taking that into consideration. You don't want to over design, but you don't want to under design, and you don't want to leave yourself vulnerable, and making sure that the systems that you are using, there's integration in that. There are so many conversations that, oh man, and be specific too. If you say we need this door hardware, you have to be specific. Otherwise, you're going to end up with something from Walmart, and then you have vulnerabilities or something off of Amazon. So yeah, really creating that team, and obviously feel free to reach out to any of us for that. But then
Yeah, great points there. And then David, so in the context of this discussion, especially best practices, can you talk a little bit about the Safety Act and how that relates? And actually, if you could start with a brief description of the Safety Act for people who might not be familiar with it, that'd be great.
Sure. And I'll be quick here. We're at the end of the time, but essentially the Safety Act is, it gives DHS the ability to designate a product or service. And then if there's some sort of terrorist incident, and that product or service is implicated as having not performed well enough or somehow been the proximate cause of failure, then the company that provides that product or service has limited liability in that case. And the customers of that product or service are immune from liability blamed for that product or service. So in this context, it stands out in several ways. It stands out on the cyber side. It stands out on the physical security side. It stands out on the best practices and on the standard side. So, over the years, there have been physical, hardware devices as well as services related to cybersecurity and things like that have had Safety Act coverage. And of course, there's plenty of physical security items, bollards and gates and guards that have Safety Act coverage. So as these data centers come online, it's important that they look for things that have this Safety Act coverage, not only because DHS has evaluated it, but also because it gives them some protection in the event of a terrorist incident. And yes, it's only a terrorist incident, not a glitch in a software update by your contractor. But the other thing is that the data center as a whole just like stadiums have done, should get Safety Act coverage for their holistic security processes, whether it's the physical, cyber, or combination. And to address Amy's point earlier about insurance costs, there have been attempts over the last 20-something years to use the fact that you have these specific technologies or services or your own holistic program covered, that your insurance should be lowered, your insurance premium should be lowered because your risk is lowered. So that's a discussion you can have with your risk managers and your brokers and such. So I think it's an important piece of this. If you're doing all this work to make things physically secure on the cyber front, you might as well go the extra step and get this additional benefit and protect yourself from some liability.
All right. Thanks, David. All right.
I do want to just make one comment as David had mentioned, for Safety Act certified, it is, terrorist attack, not, a contractor issue. Even in thinking in terms of your physical security, your perimeter security, understanding that there is another level in addition to the threats, either inside or outsider threat. It can be an accidental road is icy, car hits the fence, flips over, they flip it back, and it starts on fire. Or some accidental or human error. EPO switches have been removed from data centers because too many accidental errors of pushing the emergency button. So there's so many levels and components, not just compliance and insider outsider threats, but also we're humans, and humans make mistakes, and trying to mitigate that as well.
All right, so we actually have quite a few questions here. Unfortunately, only a few minutes left. So if it's okay with you, I'll circulate some of these after the fact, and maybe we can get back to them via email. But we'll try to get to a couple at least. So one attendee asked if you could talk to the layers of video and access control for each zone, especially inside the building.
That's a really easy question with a complicated answer if you want to get to that, but it's a good one. So I think one of the best practices in terms of the design pattern now is looking at all the critical spaces that you might have. And with data centers, there's a lot of them, but really adopt the video verification principle, that if you've got a door that's got some kind of, especially a multi-factor authentication in order to pass through, then always use, in my opinion, should use video verification. I'm a big believer in if an alarm goes off, and if a door alarm goes off, you need to know that, and B, somebody should be looking at it. So video verification, I think, goes quite a long way. And then my other one then would be around power. That I've always considered, especially video, but also the access control system, to be, rather than utility systems like some people would consider them, they are functionally critical systems that support whatever the infrastructure, in this case data centers, is. Therefore, the full program around patches and updates and hardening, especially doing the manufacturer's hardline guiding, is really crucial to do. But then secondly, just in terms of power supplies and making sure that if there is some kind of degradation in power, that those systems are up and running well. So I would just offer those two as sort of off the hip thoughts.
Right, thanks, William. Any other thoughts on that as we approach the end of our time? And if not, that's the timing is perfect. So that would be okay. But all right, want to thank you all for being part of this session. I really appreciate all of the insights, all the great information, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ron.
Yeah.
All right, take care. All right, so moving on to our next session, if I could ask Nadi, Chris, and Sean to join us. All right, so we just talked about physical threats for the most part for the past 30 minutes. Now we're going to focus on cyber. Obviously, there's overlap there. There's convergence. You know, maybe we shouldn't even be doing two separate sessions here, but that's the way we happen to structure today. So to start things off, once again, I'll ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. So Sean, if you wouldn't mind leading off.
Yeah, sure. So, name's Sean Wallace. I spent about 20 years working in critical infrastructure, including cybersecurity, and now I head up those efforts for Limited Technology, which is a systems integrator specializing in that area. It's been an unbelievable journey. You know, they operate a true hybrid model when it comes to data centers. They have huge on-prem data centers. They have OT, IT, SCADA systems, depending on what process it is. And, you know, they're also using the cloud for pure SaaS applications, but also infrastructure as a service. So they're really covering kind of every aspect of this. I'm on the CIA Utility Advisory Board, and yeah, appreciate Ron and CIA for organizing the session today.
All right, thank you, Sean. And Chris.
Chris Walcott, Chief Security Officer at Direct Defense. We're a cybersecurity, full service cybersecurity company. So managed security services, MSSP, for both the IT and the OT world. Pen testing, app testing, compliance services, and an OT SCADA specialty practice. I've been in the industry about 25 years, started on a energy commodities trading floor help desk, and 25 years later here, I've been through an engineering firm, some time at SunGard, and about 7 years here at Direct Defense. So focused most of my career on critical infrastructure and commercial and industrial manufacturing, but also have quite a bit of breach work experience, and I'm on committees for NERC and the American Water Works Association.
And Nadi.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Natia Bebe. I am managing partner and engineering lead at CC Tech Consulting. At CC Tech, it's a small business based in Washington, D.C., and we focus on becoming a one-stop shop for federal and state and local government clients that want to build on AWS, you know, anywhere from building a cloud strategy to configuration and setup within the cloud. So really that one-stop shop for cloud. And part of it is also dealing with security within the cloud. My background started off on the software side, mostly on the development modernization effort, then did DevOps, so closer to the infrastructure, DevSecOps, and then for the past 6 years, I was at AWS, really helping different government agencies in building their cloud strategy, as well as talking to them and like building different cloud infrastructures.
Thank you for that. All right, so to start things off, can we discuss the cybersecurity, the nature of cybersecurity in the context of data centers and kind of the unique facilities that they are? That is, there are a lot of clients that are storing their information there. So you have all these multiple users. Are they bringing their own controls? Are they bringing their own vulnerabilities? How does that play out?
Yeah, I think the answer is both, really, depending on what the model is. And it's interesting, if customers are using just a SaaS service in the cloud, which is pure data center, sometimes they'll go through kind of like a paper risk analysis process. But do you really understand what the security controls are in place that that cloud provider has implemented around the applications that you're taking advantage of? So you have kind of this one end of the scale where you've completely outsourced the function through a SaaS model, but maybe you're not going all the way with the cloud service provider to really see what kind of cybersecurity they're putting in place. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, you might be putting workloads up into a data center and just using its infrastructure, in which case you're pretty much responsible for the cybersecurity of those assets that you have inside that data center. At the same time, the data center providers got to have their own cybersecurity program just to make sure they don't have business interruptions. So the spectrum kind of along this can be pretty broad, really depending on what you're doing with the cloud and where, you know, it's located and how you're utilizing it.
I think I'll add to that. One of the challenges is the convergence of cyber and physical security. So if you're the data center provider, you're going to have cameras and card access and readers. And in some cases, if it's a colo facility, you may have multiple clients that have their own cages or their own racks, and they may want to bring their own physical security controls. They may want to bring their own cameras. They may want to have a different badge access on their equipment. But at the end of the day, it's typically on some sort of shared network environment. And so the data center provider has to take some of the responsibility for some segmentation, but then the client also has to realize that this is a shared media and that they have some responsibility as well. When we talk about paper-based governance, it's really common when establishing a relationship with a data center provider to ask them for a SOC 2 or a SOC 3 report, the SSAE 16. But most organizations are just going to say, okay, you did it, it's valid within the past year. They're not going to dig into any of the implementation. And SOC 2 and SOC 3 are both tunable frameworks. You can pick and choose some of the controls to some level. And so there really should be that level of due diligence of saying, did they take one trusted cyber criteria, or did they take all of them? How have they implemented these controls? And how does that integrate with the controls that I intend to put in place to protect my systems, my workloads, my data?
Yeah, I'm guessing that a lot of people, when they put their data in a data center, in many cases, they're probably thinking, well, the data center is going to take care of security. I could just kind of forget about it at this point. Is that not a good approach not a good mindset to have?
Agreed. And I think in my experience too, that's kind of the misconception, right? Like if you're especially using one of the cloud providers, you're just taking that data, just throwing it there, and you're like, oh, now AWS is compliant and has the certifications, the SOC, so we don't have to worry about it. But that's not the case. And AWS has the thing they call the shared responsibility model. So essentially, that means AWS or the public cloud provider is responsible for security of the cloud. So in the case of AWS, you don't have physical access to the hardware, the cameras and things like that. So that part AWS handles for you. But as a customer, you are responsible for security within the cloud, right? So once you're inside your environment, you are fully responsible from, and then depending on the services that matter, it varies, but all the way from your operating systems to your patching and things like that, right? So those are all things that you need to implement. And yes, AWS does give you a lot of the security features and controls, but it's up to you to implement it. And one analogy I like to give is AWS kind of gives you the keys to your house, but if you don't use it to lock it, then it's not really helpful, right? So I think that shared responsibility model is pretty critical.
It's interesting, specifically talking about things like that. You spin up an EC2 instance, for example, in AWS. They'll give you a very extensive hardening guide, but they don't turn any of those controls on. And there's hundreds, thousands, in some cases, tens of thousands of security attributes that you can assign to the different roles in your environment. And making mistakes in those can lead to credential leakage and data leakage, things that we find all the time in cloud security assessments.
Yeah. All right, Chris and Sean, I think you had both mentioned or referred to kind of a risk analysis process. Can you go more into that in terms of what it typically looks like and what it probably should look like?
Sure. I mean, Chris talked about SOC 2 certification, which is a great way to start. A lot of organizations will just have, honestly, a simple spreadsheet or a questionnaire that goes through basics and how the security is set up, at a cloud service provider or even like a vendor, for example. That's an easy first step to start asking the right questions that are out there. Templates are available, honestly, through different industry groups. It's kind of like freeware, and you can model it to make it your own. What I would advocate is you take that a step further and personally get involved with the cloud service provider cybersecurity program. You know, one of the things that I like to talk about is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Those of us in cybersecurity, it's been there forever. It's like we've watched this thing kind of develop over the last 20 years, and now you know, you've got MITRE ATT&CK ICS, which they worked with Dragos on, which is another good program. But going through the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which lays out adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge, which is what ATT&CK stands for, against the cybersecurity kill chain, and determining if there are controls in place to actually prevent that from happening or detect it. And it's a very easy exercise to do. And it's fascinating when you quiz kind of a cloud service provider on MITRE ATT&CK. If they're truthful, there'll be gaps on that TTP spreadsheet. And that's something that can prompt a conversation with them. Those are two areas that I usually direct people to start. And what I find is they'll do like a basic risk analysis, kind of take it on faith that the cloud service providers got things under control, but they really won't go a level deeper, which I think a great first step is to use something like MITRE ATT&CK.
You know, I think beyond that framework is a great way to get into things, and it should always be a risk-based approach. So if it was your own data center, if it was a physical data center that your organization owned, you might look at something like NIST 830, where you're going to look at the threat actor library and identify the criticality of systems, and then go through and figure out the likelihood and impact of different types of events. So that level of scrutiny is what really should be taking place when you're evaluating a provider that's as important as your data center provider, assuming the things you put there are critical to your business function, right? So if you lose whatever's in that data center, whether it's you know, loss of a website, loss of an e-commerce system, loss of some sort of business critical infrastructure for your processes, or theft or loss of data that can run you afoul of any one of the number of data privacy laws and standards that exist, that level of scrutiny really is where you should be starting. And if you're just sort of signing the agreement and moving stuff into the data center and accepting the attestation of the provider, you're not doing enough of your own due diligence, frankly.
All right, so Sean referred to the MITRE and MITRE ATT&CK and the controls that are in place and the potential of bad actors to circumvent, to bypass those controls. One way might be social engineering. You know, there's plenty of others as well. But can we talk a little bit about the insider threat, whether it's intentional or accidental? How do you address that? Is it a matter of training?
Training is part of it. You know, training allows people to recognize when they might be doing things or causing problems they shouldn't. Training allows people within the organization to recognize when their peers might be doing things maybe they shouldn't. Technology does play a role. So the user behavior analytics functions that exist within some of the monitoring tools that are out there will give you some insights into unusual things, but then it still comes down to whether or not you have enough of a framework in place to have compensating controls and containment capabilities and training wheels on process. So a lot of this gets down to process. You can have the most well-developed process in the world. We worked a significant breach last year where at the end of the day, one of the system administrators got SIM swapped by a threat actor. And then the threat actor called the help desk, and the help desk, after a couple of calls and some social engineering, reset those admin creds, right? So the procedure said that they shouldn't have done that, but there could have been a technical control in place to prevent that the first level help desk staff shouldn't have had the rights to do that. So a lot of times it's the little stuff that causes the biggest problems.
Yeah, and I have to agree with Chris on UEBA. I've had some experience with some of those products, and when you combine UEBA with badging and some other things going on in a facility, it's very powerful. But I would also advocate that your data center provider is kind of following the policy of least privilege. That can stop insider threat. And at the same time, it can also thwart social engineering, because if the individuals that are being targeted by the social engineer are limited in the access that they have to the systems that are in place, that alone creates a very strong line of offense, right? Like your CEO doesn't need access to your engineering drawings. Okay, so maybe you start there with least privilege, and there's a lot of great features now that have been built into these, access and administrative tools that have come on, in the last like 5 or 10 years. So yeah, that and combined with UEBA is a really good place to start for insider threat, I think.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd just like to add to what both the gentlemen just said is on the idea of least privilege. One of the things we did a lot on working with customers is also reducing the blast radius, right? Like within, let's say there is the cloud, you're not putting all your assets into one account, right? So there's a model where we say like, hey, multi-account strategy. And what that does is, in case your account cloud provider account gets compromised, the threat is not across your entire organization. You have some level of boundary there. And in addition, there's different like security features that you could enable to make sure like, hey, are you getting the right notification, alerting, and things like that? So that goes back to what Chris was saying around like building a process in place where, you're understanding that there's a problem, and then when there's a problem, you can have automated remediation techniques and tools like that that you could stop the threats.
All right, so Nadia, I'd like to stick with you on this one, but during the last session, you may have seen there was some discussion of best practices for physical security and a handful that were identified. In terms of cloud security, and you kind of started to touch on this already, but in terms of cloud security, can you identify some of the key best practices guidelines that people want to keep in mind?
Yeah, I think the first one is like, continuing your security best practice that you have or guidance that you have on-prem, having a similar mindset, even better, like continuing it on the cloud, right? Touch a little bit about the shared responsibility, but in addition, there is different documentation. Like each AWS service, there's 200 plus of them, has different best practice requirements on how to make sure that service what are the recommended paths to keep that service secure, right? So making sure you're going through the different documentations to ensure that the security of the service that you're using. But on a high level, like there are some like the one I talked about earlier, multi-account strategy is one. That's at least a common one when you're getting started using identity and access management, like things like that. And then there's also like the encryption areas that gives you, and then also leveraging a lot of the security tools that AWS offers, right? So that way, when something happens, there are some that even add some AI ML into it that tells you, hey, usually there is login from this specific range of IP addresses, but now there's an unusual from this locations, right? So spending a little bit of time and understanding what security services are available to you, and then going from there, I think would be the easiest way. I mean, we could spend days talking about the best practices across the world, across the different services, but I'll sum it up there.
Right. So you mentioned AI, and that came up earlier in this presentation. But what is the impact of AI at this point, both in terms of bad actors using it and in terms of its potential for defense?
So
Yeah, well, I know adversaries have been leveraging cloud compute power for a long time, right? So the kind of, this old notion of, somebody wearing a gray hoodie, eating pizza, drinking Mountain Dew in a basement, like forget that. These are people wearing, khakis and polos. They're highly organized. They actually specialize in different areas of the kill chain. They'll subcontract to each other. So they're using artificial intelligence now. We talked about social engineering. They're certainly using it for that. But they've built machine learning code that'll actually run attacks. So then it'll kind of see what works, and then it'll learn, and then it'll try it again. And you have different groups that specialize this. So the adversaries are getting extremely sophisticated by using artificial intelligence. At the same time, this artificial intelligence code and compute power alone has got extreme levels of value. So when it comes to data center physical security and cybersecurity, the attack surface is getting larger, but the value of the asset that we're trying to protect, which is this basically AI compute, but then also the AI code, is only increasing. So it's creating, I think, a much more of an acute problem for us in the industry, that now we've had all the typical threats, but you're going to have kind of this additional crown jewel in AI that adversaries are going to try to get access to.
So it's really common when an organization is using AI for their own purposes, for them to train, either use a commercial LLM or them to train their own LLM. And because of the cost of compute power and GPUs, a lot of times they'll put that in the cloud. So it's also possible to get access to that if credentials aren't established properly and controls aren't put in place. And to be able to feed that LLM additional information that you can use to turn it against its owner. That's not difficult. I spoke alongside an expert on this topic at DEF CON just this past weekend, talking about this a little bit. So this is one of those areas where organizations really need to plan and understand, and to Nadi's point, and probably part of his expertise, when you establish something like this in the cloud, you need to understand the structure of your project, where the data flows are, what you expect the interactions to look like, and start to establish your normal baseline so that you can understand where you need to put your controls. To that point, there's also a data governance piece of this as well. So a lot of organizations may have a great idea for their project. They may understand exactly what they want an application to do or a cloud architecture to do, but they don't necessarily have a firm grasp on all the data that's going to be contained in it. They haven't necessarily gone through the steps to properly classify the criticality of that data and to establish the control layers necessary to protect certain things more than others. And then that gets back into what I was talking about earlier, and things like credential leakage and establishing the access control within the cloud space, within the application space, so that you don't have roles being assigned where they're not necessary, and back to least privilege, right? There are certain functions that only very certain few people need and should have.
All right, Chris, while you have the floor. So before this session, a day or two ago, we were talking and you said, and I wrote the quote down, you need to treat the cloud the same as on-prem from a hardening perspective. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yes. So some organizations decide that they're going to move their infrastructure into cloud, and whether they're going to use a service provider like AWS or whether they're going to move to private cloud, mentally, there's an offloading of risk and the shared responsibility that Nadi referenced earlier that AWS has as part of their service model. You need to retain the mindset that the risk is yours and your provider is just going to give you some tools. You need to be able to pick and choose and determine what's necessary, just as if it was your own brick and mortar data center. And that goes all the way down to that cyber physical convergence as well. Because one of our pen testers' favorite ways to break in is through unsecured cameras and NVRs. If they can get into a physical data center somewhere that way, it doesn't matter that it's not your data center and maybe it's AWS's. If they can get into that and get into the quote unquote cloud that it contains, then anybody who's in that space potentially can be attacked from that vantage point as a pivot point. So you need to take that into consideration when you put your defenses in place, and not just treat it like I'm going to throw this thing into this, cloud space, this ephemeral thing, and not have to worry about it the same way I would as if it was in my own backyard.
All right, so I started this session by suggesting that maybe we shouldn't be having separate half hours for physical and cyber. So let's close it by talking a bit about convergence. What is the role here of convergence and having a holistic view of physical and cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think you can look at it in a couple ways. Sort of like Chris said, one of the easiest ways to compromise a data center is probably to take out its cooling system, which could be either a cyber or a physical attack. So while a lot of attention is put on kind of the data center proper, don't forget the utilities that are around it, the backup systems. Some places have even like Liebert cabinets and those kind of things. Those are actually vulnerabilities that need to be looked at. And I would argue, at least from my standpoint, that it really depends on the situation. I've been in some areas where the on-prem data center is super cyber hardened, but it's in a non-discrete building off by an airport. And if you knew it was there, it'd be pretty easy to compromise from a physical security standpoint. And I've also seen the opposite, where their cybersecurity controls and even like their firewall rules are woefully out of date, creating a large vulnerability there. But boy, they got the physical security lockdown. So I think it really starts with kind of this overall risk-based approach, and that Chris was talking about earlier, looking at the value of the assets, and then looking at the facility where the assets are stored, and then considering both aspects, physical and cyber, kind of in the same mindset.
Sean said that, and it took me back to early in my career. I physically have carried servers out of a data center down 5 flights of stairs in the dark because a hurricane hit the East Coast. I was working for a company that was near the water, and the data center was on the 5th floor. The generator was on the roof, but the diesel tank was in the basement. And water flooded the city. It flooded the basement. It ruptured the tank, and we were literally in a hazmat environment carrying these servers down to get them to the ground floor to take them to the other data center that was 80% finished. So, part of this gets into the business continuity and disaster recovery planning piece, which we could spend a whole lot of time about. But, I think the one other tidbit that popped in my head is don't just rely on the cloud for your backups, particularly as part of BCDR. Make sure that you have some sort of nearline or even retain some offline capabilities. And that might be local to you. It might be with an entirely different provider in a different part of the world. But take that into consideration as well as part of that convergence discussion.
Yeah. I think I just want to touch on one point that you mentioned right now, which is DR, right? Which is critical, right? Like, because to your point, right? Like, if you just think like, let's say like, hey, cloud is just your backup and restore. There are situations when these cloud providers don't work or like something happens, right? So there's different ways, like best practices to the point earlier around how do you go and build, your software, your application to leverage a multi-region, like maybe you have some of your workloads in the West region, as well as some in the East, things like that, multi-account, multiple availability zones. Obviously, I think leveraging the cloud makes your ability to use multiple regions and multiple data centers easier because, they're all at a click. But there's different things like strategies in place that depending on your requirements from a business continuity and your risk level that you could set up. So that way, even though like you're in one cloud provider, you are set up for high availability and security.
All right, great. I think that's a perfect endpoint. So I want to thank all of you for participating in this session. Nati, Chris, and Sean, really appreciate all the support, all the great information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ron.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right, and for our last session of the day, David, I think you're up there.
I am here.
All right, excellent.
Excellent.
So,
right.
Yeah, for our final session, we are pleased to have David Johnston from CISA. And David, if you don't mind, I'll as I did with the others, I'll ask you to say a few words about yourself, and then we'll get into your presentation.
Perfect. Sounds good. Well, first I'd like to compliment all the presenters today. I think there's some outstanding topics that were covered, a lot of overlap, talking really about that physical cyber convergence, which is one of the tenets of our organization as well. So it's a great opportunity. So thank you very much to everybody who's joined us today as well. Like I said, Dave Johnston, I work for CISA, which is a component of the Department of Homeland Security, specifically that cyber and physical infrastructure, so that convergence mission. And my roles, I'm based in Maryland as a supervisory protective security advisor focusing on physical security, but we also commonly delve into cybersecurity, and then we have specialists that work in that area as well. So what I'd like to do today is to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen here for a presentation. And you guys, you got that, Ron, coming up on your screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. Let's see what it says here. Maybe it just wants to confirm.
Oh, here it comes.
How's that?
There it is. We have it.
Perfect. Sounds good. So once again, within the federal government and America as a whole, we do about half of our work with the private sector and half with the public sector. So public sector being state and local government, et cetera. But private sector is a big part of that. In fact, over 75% of the critical infrastructure in America is owned by the private sector. And it pretty much all falls into one of these 16 sectors that you see listed on the screen right here. And so the great thing about that is pretty much every one of them has some kind of data center. And, it's very interesting because over time, America and the IT front has basically evolved from using floppy disk to using mag tapes. If you guys have ever seen those in the past, very interesting concept, to CDs, and then cloud environment, which could be that private, public, or hybrid. And then now we're kind of moving into edge computing. But, clouds and data centers are always going to be there to manage the information and the data. And now that we're getting so much data, it's so difficult to manage that, right? But what I just like from the security standpoint, all excellent points that I love that were discussed today, all the way from least privilege to that convergence and things like the Safety Act. So there's a lot of tools and mechanisms out there that can, protect you and your information. And, you always hear that too. If it's free, you're the product, right? So you always got to take that into consideration. When we look at actual security of a data center, this could be any facility. That layered defense concept, you see those multiple gates, et cetera, is a great example, could also be applied to data centers. And it was mentioned early on, I love that term, the guns, gates, and guards, right? That was first developed back in the nuclear security industry to keep people out of really sensitive nuclear facilities. But it's basically transgressed across all different types of facilities, including data centers. And traditionally, you look at that layered defense, and that's what people focus when they talk about security, okay? Some of the threat vectors that kind of people also think about very commonly, active shooter. We get a lot of requests for active shooter presentations, discussions, threat mitigation, et cetera. As we heard today, things like insider threat, and also something I'm going to talk about today, as well as fire as a weapon. I love the discussion about the small unmanned aircraft systems, UAS, right, or drones, especially those ones that are 55 pounds or less. That's what we're looking at here. A lot of them commercially available. But there's a lot of different avenues that we can look at and talk to. So, since we've covered a lot of great topics today, I want to talk just a little bit more about what CISA is, what the threat is today to America, right? And whether that be foreign or domestic, and then also risk. But most importantly, we're going to focus on a little bit more in detail on the insider threat from both an organization and individual level. Fire as a weapon, because that could be another perspective from an active assailant and what you can do. And you may be surprised by some of the attacks that have happened most recently, even in the last few days. And finally, resilient power. So all these are very connected together. And I think the importance is always be looking at what the future may hold, always be able to, visualize, what the future is going to hold. You're not always going to get it perfect, but at least you're always keeping your spectrum open to be able to look what those new threats could be. So first of all, CISA, as it implies, right? It's kind of redundant there a little bit, but Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, it's really just think of it as that physical cyber convergence mission. We have a number of goals, just like any organization, and everything we consider left of boom, right? Everything that happens before. We're not law enforcement individuals. Our goal is to help organizations be better prepared. And we're also very respectful of your information. And one of the very first presenters talked about federal employees are very different today than they were even a few years ago. And they'll continue to evolve because it's about partnerships, right? And so whether that, and also our stakeholders, who we provide that to. So we're not looking to get your information, we're looking to share lessons learned from you, because on a day-to-day basis, even in my role as a physical security advisor, we go out to all those 16 different sectors over a year. We hear a lot of good lessons from those individuals and organizations. And our goal is to share those anonymously with other partners that we go to. And we do that through a multitude of different levels, all the way from a very tactical level to an individual facility, to an organization, to a Fortune 500, and obviously through different mechanisms like tabletop exercises, assessments, et cetera. Once again, our goal is to protect your information and going forward. So today, this is how the United States is laid out in terms of our organization, CISA. This mirrors the FEMA regional model concept pretty much exactly. And so what you can do is use that QR code on the left. That will take you to a regional picture, and then you can click on your respective region and then email them, and they can be put in contact with my counterparts across the United States There's about 150 people like myself across the United States that cover all those. Some states have 1 or 2, some have 6, 7, or 8. Just depends how big the population or the geographic area is. And we're willing to come out and talk to you, hear about your concerns, hear about your good ideas, share other information and other proven practices on an anonymous basis, and work you through a lot of the products. Because as you heard early on, insider threat, it sounds simple, but it's kind of a lot more complicated than you may think. And every situation is a little bit different. So it's like, you know, for people go to the library and you look at the Encyclopedia Britannica, right? It's a whole series of books. Where do you look, right? Where do you be able to find things? But if you have somebody that kind of guides you through it, that librarian, and we can basically help assist, you know, suggesting some ideas. And all of our products are available on the internet. I'm going to show you some additional QR codes as we go along where you can resource that information. So physical cyber convergence, we heard that multiple times today. I will tell you, even today, when I go out to organizations, Fortune 500 companies, state government, federal government, doesn't matter, that basically there's 2 different silos. And those include basically the physical and the cyber side. So a lot of times the chief security officer or the security team falls underneath the facilities director. Facilities director, for the most part, is worried about keeping the power on, keeping the operations going at the facility, and keeping everybody's feeling safe, right? So whenever they spend money, it makes them a little bit nervous. Remember, security is not a profit center. And so it kind of, a lot of times things or priorities get lost, right? You hear the same story on the other side with CISO, and you see a lot of these memes on the internet, and it's pretty accurate. You know, the C-suite doesn't want to invest in cybersecurity or physical security until something bad happens. Then they're just writing checks and just handing information out, right? But after the fact, your information has already been compromised and you've already had an incident potentially. And so when you look at that, really the future of this, and you hear this a lot when you go to RSA, Black Hat, et cetera, is the concept of a chief risk officer, somebody that you can basically take those individual physical security and cyber security and have them report to a single entity at the C-suite. Also, a lot of talk about the CISO, as you probably have heard, that moving them, elevating them to the true C-suite level instead of being under just the CIO or another mechanism. So the point is, listen to what your counterparts have talked about on today's webinar and take those ideas back to your organization, no matter how small or how large, and really kind of look at the future, because it's all about managing risk, right? Once again, our goal, our mission, left to boom, I think that's what every organization should be at. Looking at opportunities to unify and identify good ideas and implement them, you know, ahead of something bad happening. So, you know, I won't spend too much time on this slide. Pretty common sense stuff, you know. It's a risk is the threat, the vulnerability, and consequence, that Venn diagram where they line up. Every situation may be a little bit different, okay? And when you look at things from a risk management standpoint, you probably have heard you can either avoid the risk, you can spread the risk out over a larger spectrum, you can transfer the risk to another organization, you can reduce that, or you can just accept it. And that may vary very differently along the different supply chain or functions of your organization. And it may change based on time of year or type of event or incident that's going on. And so it's something to take into consideration. But remember, in the end of the day, everyone's a risk manager. No one wants anything bad to happen normally. So you're trying to mitigate that threat going forward. So once again, we're going to dive a little bit into insider threat, fire as a weapon, and also the future, which I think is resilient power supply and how that can work with generators, which is a very important thing within the data center realm. So as highlighted earlier, you know, an insider can be a lot of different people. But really look at it as somebody who the organization trusts. They've given them a key in some form, whether that's a physical key or whether that's some type of access control to get into either a facility or into a server or something else. And also could be somebody who in the past worked for the organization and that authority was not revoked, right? So that concept of least privilege that was noted earlier, very, very important, right? And once again, when someone departs, how you do that. So we have a number of checklists and different procedures that are not only for leadership, but also for HR and also for operators to be able to basically, you know, process information when they collect it. The key is if someone is speaking up, like this doesn't seem right, right? Your spider sense is just saying this activity of this person is not doing something, that concept to see something, say something. You need to document it. and you need to get it to the right person. Who it's reported to, they're probably not going to be a subject matter expert on insider threat or cybersecurity or whatever it is. But as long as you get the facts, and then you can route that through, and HR and legal are important components to that of having a safety committee at your organization. So once again, think about it. Someone your organization trusts, someone's knowledgeable about it, and someone that you want to trust, but you also want to give them the opportunity to feel safe while they're working there. As noted earlier as well, you have two types of an insider threat. It could be intentional or unintentional. It could be somebody that basically goes to the fax machine thinking they're making a copy and accidentally hits the fax button. Just an honest mistake. Or maybe they had some other paperwork involved in there that had some kind of personalized information, PII or PHI health information, or maybe it's some other type of proprietary information gets sent out. They should feel confident being able to report that was an accident and be able to mitigate that threat. Okay. People shouldn't be fearful of reporting, because that's when things are going to turn bad, that you don't know what it's gotten out and what you can do. It could also be intentional. And that intentional could be someone who's a disgruntled employee. It could be somebody that's a janitor or another vendor or contractor that has access to the facility that's mad or upset or has a misinterpretation of a reason that they should have a grievance against that organization. So the importance of that layered defense, just like you have with the physical security, is the importance to be able to have people feel confident that they can report an incident. And also, both of those spectrums, both intentional and unintentional, it could be a collusive threat. So someone's working together. Someone tries to make friends, right? Befriend an organization or a person within an organization to work collaboratively, or it could be a third-party threat. And that could be somebody, once again, that contractor, vendor, whatever it may be. It could even be a contractor or vendor that you give them a badge. A lot of them, they give them a badge for the whole facility and they share it with somebody else. And somebody else is able to penetrate their organization. So, you really have to take, careful thought about how you hand those out. And there's nothing wrong with having somebody escort the contractor or vendor around the facility. There's nothing wrong with asking your employees, hey, can you put the trash outside the room that contains the important information or a data center? So, it's a collaborative team effort to be able to prevent this insider threat from happening. And also, I hate to say it, but it could be a family member. It could be somebody else, a neighbor, if they know what's going on. So you have to be able to have that situational awareness. Real quickly on the insider threat perspective, and like I said, if you give us a call, email, we're willing to come out and sit down with you and talk to you about your specific challenges and some very specific tactics, techniques, and procedures that you can actually put into place to try to mitigate this threat from a very low probability. Very high consequence would be the loss of life, right? Someone loses their life. That would be very tragic. But most commonly used insider threat directly, basically equivalent to a financial loss to an organization, that intellectual property theft, right? But there's also the loss of reputation, which can affect an organization long term. So you got to realize there's a lot of different threat vectors. There's a lot of different perspective to this. And at the end of the day, the organization has to be able to build their insider threat program. But I'm going to share a QR code with you here that's going to take you to a lot of those plans. Early on, Carnegie Mellon was mentioned as well. We've worked very closely with them to develop our insider threat tool, which will help guide your organization. So you bring the right people to the table, from legal to HR to operations to cyber to physical to C-suite, et cetera. And we sit down and have a discussion about that. This is not an inspection. We're not the fire marshal, right? We're not come out there try to gig you on something. We're trying to share valuable information with you. And also it was highlighted very importantly early on, the importance of working with your local partners, right? Whether that's law enforcement, whether that's the fire department, whether that's the Office of Emergency Management at the city or county level. They know your local area the best. I cover, supervised team across Maryland and Delaware. I don't know every jurisdiction and what exact their procedures. So when I come out, I invite those with the approval of the partner to bring along that local law enforcement, emergency manager, fire, et cetera. So you can hear directly from them in your community what you're likely to basically encounter as a challenge and what things are going to respond. So from that data center perspective, very interesting statistics here. Once again, prevention is the key. of there, and about 2 years ago, we put this data together. There was 42 separate computer system sabotage incidents that were analyzed. And about 58% of the time, right, those perpetrators communicated some type of negative feeling. They had a grievance. They had an interest in causing harm, potentially, whether to an organization or an individual or data, whatever it may be. 92% of it verbally. So just think about that. You're talking about water cooler kind of talk. You're talking about someone maybe just saying something in passing, right? Something that, once again, your spider sense of that average employee sets it off. Those individuals ought to feel confident going to their supervisor. And if they don't, then to HR. HR has a lot of good things, human resources, to help report. Have some type of mechanism, whether that be an 800 number. You can use an outside vendor, or you could have an internal form, whatever it is. And we have some different forms that are available that have been basically PDFs that we share with you. You can customize them to report to your own email. We don't get any data. You're not sharing anything with us. It's just a mechanism for asking the right questions so that you can collect the facts. So you can do a follow-on investigation, whether that is internal or in partnership with your state and local law enforcement at your discretion. But what's really interesting as well, 31% of the time, right? Others had information about that person's intentions or activities before it had it. A lot of times coworkers, but remember, like we mentioned earlier, friends, family workers, or someone involved in the incident. They just said something or they didn't say something, right? So that see something, say something is very, very important. And of course, you have violent attacks. No one wants it. That's that low probability, high consequence, effect that you could have. So the goal, just keep your situational awareness and that layered defense up. And as well, going forward, build that supportive culture. It shouldn't be a gotcha kind of mentality. People make mistakes, right? So if they accidentally faxed some information or shared some information or did whatever it is, they shouldn't, as long as they're not doing it intentionally, right? Or it's not a repetitive pattern. You have to be able to learn from that. That's how you make your defense mechanism stronger. And obviously, as we talked about, safeguarding those organizational valuables, there's a lot of different terminology out there in data centers, whether it's that software as a service, platform as a service, right? Or everything as a service, right? That X in front. You have to be able to realize you have to have those same layers of defense. And I'll give you a quick example. You look at a data center, you drive by a lot of them, and there's a lot of them in their area, where we live out here in the National Capital Region out in the Dulles area. Those have, really high-speed fences, cameras, the terrain, everything's been very fortified. But think about it. How does that data get into that data center, right? Fiber and other communications mechanisms going in and out of there. How is that protected once it leaves that area? So that's where we're working with state and local law enforcement, critical nodes, other supply routes, gates. They can use those people to your advantage, to law enforcement, to be able to patrol that. If they see something unusual, they should have a contact to be able to get to your SOC, right? To be able to, hey, we got a problem, we got an issue here. You may want to look into it. Maybe it's a nothing burger, right? Maybe it's a contractor just doing some work, or maybe it's something that somebody trying to probe your organization. That positive communication and exchanging of intelligence is extremely important with the state and locals. Okay, so going forward. So once again, here's the QR codes as we wrap up this section. Feel free to leave it on here for a second. You can take those, or you can just do an internet search on these terms. CISA, insider threat, all these resources are available. Once again, the QR code we showed at the beginning, and we'll show it at the end, how to get in contact with your local security advisor through our regional office. We're more than willing to come out and sit down with you and be able to discuss these different opportunities of how to protect yourself. So hopefully, nothing bad happens in the future. All right. Any questions in the queue on that before I move on to fire as a weapon? There, Ron?
So we have one question, David, about insider threat.
Okay.
Are there ever groomed employees that have no idea they are being led or coerced?
Absolutely. And so, you look at an organization and the outsiders, right? And that could be foreign or domestic, looks and sees who goes in the building. And they could do things as simple as going to the local coffee shop near your facility. And a lot of people like to talk shop and basically identify the people that they think could be an issue or an opportunity, and then follow them and target them. And then to gain that illicit information from them, even just trying to strike up a conversation. So you have to be very careful about the information you share. And if you think someone's trying to gain information from you, definitely report it to your security officer at your organization. So absolutely, people could be groomed to be, intelligence assets. And here's another thing: once they get a little piece of information, they're going to try to basically convince you, hey, if you don't give me more, I'm going to turn you in. Well, it's only going to get worse from there, right? And this has happened across the military, across the private sector, public sector. This is how adversaries recruit individuals and then groom them into what they think they could be. So ask for help early is the key. So, any other questions? If not, we'll move right on into fire as a weapon.
Yeah, I think you're good to move on. Thanks.
So when you look at that active assailant perspective, once again, a lot of people think active shooter. You see more and more vehicle ramming, edged weapons. But imagine if you used fire as a weapon. Very, very devastating. It can be pretty much anonymous in a lot of respects, or it could be something that uses a force multiplier or as a diversion, right, to be able to do that. So just last week, if you're following the media, there was a series of incidents where there was an improvised explosive device, an IED, right? That's basically the equivalent of a military type munition that's made out of things you can find at your house, at the drugstore, the beauty supply store. You'd be surprised what you can make out of things you just find out in the economy today. And they were able to basically have those devices they targeted towards trash cans. Could be a probing, could be to see what the response is going to be. It could be to see what the effect's going to be, whatever it may be. But imagine if that was further on employed, towards a data center or towards some type of IT infrastructure, once again, that comes in or out of that facility. If you follow the earlier this year as well, the Moscow concert hall, where the adversaries to the Russian government were able to utilize that, to cause a lot of damage and harm. So it can be very, very bad. And realize that in most fires, it's not the fire that really causes a lot of damage or harm to people. It's the smoke afterwards, right? So just think of that and what the impact could be. And, it was unfortunate, no matter where you are, what part of the world, that there was an amount of loss of life as a result of that. So once again, that see something, say something mentality, very, very important. Back to January 6th in the United States here in 2021, there were 2 IEDs left outside a Democratic and Republican national office. Those were operational explosive devices. A lot of times people will make what they think is a bomb or trying to make make other people think it's a bomb, but it's not. But those 2 devices were real, and they do happen no matter what slice of society you're at across the United States, in rural communities or in cities all the time. There's also a lot of bomb threats that come in too, right? Or you hear the latest swatting techniques and whatever it may be. But the concept is this is a very real threat. And the reason I bring it up more specifically for data centers is what we're going to move into next, talking about resilient power. Data centers are critical on having generators, because if you don't have electricity, you can't transmit the information, right? So you got to have a generator. So what runs that generator currently? Well, a lot of them are natural gas, but now with more green-friendly programs, diesel is still out there as well, right? Diesel fuel could be used. Imagine if you were able to open that tank and flood an area or basically divert an area or have some kind of concept from that. You now have a huge fuel source that an adversary could use to cause damage, because water runs downhill, so does fuel, right? So a lot of times people wouldn't even give a second guess if a fuel truck came up to a facility and what impact that you could have. Once again, a Molotov cocktail, any other types of things can be hidden as a lot of different perspectives. So back to that concept, if someone's bringing looks like a bottle of wine to work, you probably have a lot of questions for that individual, right? And what may or may not happen. So maybe you have a policy on that and be able to analyze that. And, this is a multi-layered defense, and we're not going to go into it too much today, but video analytics and cameras and the data management you have on that side, once again, tightly tied back to data centers. There are a lot of predictive software out there today that you can say, hey, the mannerism of what this person's doing or where they're at or what they're carrying causes suspicion to where basically they should be questioned by security and thinking about it from that realm. But in closing on this, huge increase. Even, a couple of years ago, it takes a while to analyze data, huge increase in the amount of, incendiary, right, or some kind of fuel or arson as a weapon going towards other individuals. And once again, whether that's basically out in the country or in populous areas, this is a real threat that we encourage you to keep an eye on. So any type of control mechanisms and what you should be allowed to bring in and out of facilities should be very tightly regulated and controlled. So as we wrap up today, I want to talk a little bit about resilient power, that redundancy, right? We all know that you ought to have a primary, secondary, and tertiary way of doing business, whether that is going to be your data, right, through concepts out there backing up information, right, as like in RAID we had in the past, or to be able to look at, power sources. And as we talked about, natural gas and diesel are great, especially natural gas. No matter what happens pretty much in a disaster, that natural gas is always going to flow. Diesel's more difficult because generators take a lot of fuel, and you have to have a resupply mechanism. Most of facilities, 24 to 48, maybe 72 hours, they can run off the generators. These data centers take a lot of energy, both to cool the facility and to operate the data, right? So kind of a way forward is hydrogen. Now, the thing about hydrogen, you're probably saying, whoa, what about like the hydrogen blimp? That could be a big threat, and it can be. If you store a large amount of hydrogen, that can be a challenge. And right now, also producing hydrogen takes us about natural gas is the primary way of doing it currently. Making hydrogen from natural gas can be a very hazardous procedure. But really going forward, the U.S. Department of Energy, great information on the right here, .gov domain. You can basically click on that and read more about electrolysis. And that's what they call green hydrogen, so on-time delivery. And they can actually take regular water and basically split those hydrogen and oxygen into two parts. The oxygen is just releasing in the atmosphere, not going to cause any harm. And then that hydrogen that's used on demand can be used to run generators. That's really going to be the future of it. It's going to cut down on the waste. It's going to be able to make it supply on demand. And as long as you have water, which in some places, water is a very scarce commodity, right? But think of it as a way of going forward in that concept. Just real quick on how it works. Once again, we just kind of splits the concept apart. You're not trying to store a lot of hydrogen. What you're trying to do is produce just enough to accomplish the purpose of running the generator. And then from there, you can once again release the normal oxygen into the air. Some great research on this. It's still kind of on the cutting edge because there's a lot of cost involved and a lot of regulation and everything else. But Maryland, where we are, even the state level government is starting to regulate having natural gas or having open flame at your stove in your house and generators, et cetera. So really, kind of getting ahead of the power curve and just realizing that you have to be able to manage that threat and looking at the perspective. So as we wrap up today, and we'll take some questions from the audience as applicable, Ron, share the information, right, with those state and local partners. Very, very important. Also create that culture of security awareness, that see something, say something we talked about, taking the time to get a Safety Act certification, also conducting a risk assessment. We have developed risk assessments and also safety and security assessments through a multitude of different threat vectors. We're willing to come out and walk around your facility and basically offer you that written report, confidential report. All the information that we collect is basically just for the report. And it's under a program called PCII, Protected Critical Infrastructure Information, which means anything that you tell us. And we're not asking for a lot of details. We're just asking about the general security posture of the facility cannot be released by the federal government to any type of legal process, whether that be the Freedom of Information Act or other legal proceeding. When we classify that report as that protected critical infrastructure information, it helps protect you, us, and everybody involved and Americans as a whole. We also talk about the importance of having a security and emergency action plan, and we can go through some of those perspectives. And we're thinking of a security plan is everything that's going to protect you, and an emergency action plan is how you're going to respond to that incident afterwards. And then there's additional plans you could have, but those are the two up front. And then conducting training. That was mentioned several times in today's webinar. It's very important to train on things. And, we have things called tabletops in a box we can share with you. It's pretty much a discussion already put together. All you do is put in some pictures and run it yourself. You can ask us to come in and help facilitate, or definitely involve your state and local when applicable. And this is not a gotcha, hey, we're going to hold you accountable, it's going to be on your evaluation kind of exercise. This is an open discussion. And a lot of people think tabletops and very detailed. It could be as simple as throwing a picture of a suspicious item up on a screen at the end of your staff meeting, and you guys talk about it, all the way to a more detailed physical cyber convergence discussion to help mitigate that threat, and hopefully refine those plans, because those plans are living documents going forward. So, as a couple of people have highlighted, the key to the future, DevSecOps, right? You got to have that development. You got to have security involved in it, no matter if you're building a new facility or a new software platform, and then operating and have that as a basically ongoing process where you can continually refine your products. Great opportunity. So in closing, we've got a couple of slides here that just show some of our products. The QR codes, and I always encourage people, if you're walking down the street and you see a pole with a QR code on it, don't scan it, because that you never know what's going to take you to that malicious website, right? But I guarantee you these QR codes are from legitimate from CISA. Great opportunities. If you don't feel confident utilizing that, you can just do an internet search of any of these terms and the keyword CISA. We are very adamant about developing programs in partnership with other partners, whether it be state or federal level, for instance, the Department of Energy, or different types of organizations at the state level, and to be able to collect your ideas and information and constantly evolve our projects and products as well. On the same respect, on the cybersecurity side, so once again, I focus on physical security, but we have that convergence. Our cybersecurity advisors and myself, we usually go out together and we have those discussions with individuals. And we have a lot of tools that are available. One of the most current ones that we have that came out is called the cybersecurity, the CPG, and protection goals. And those are basically able to go through and look and see which organization, have an honest discussion with you. And it's like the MITRE framework. It's a set of questions, right? It's a set of an outline to start that conversation to be able to customize your organization, because every organization is a little bit different. We have some other tools that are available, but this is like a 3D chess game. And you do have to work with vendors a lot of times, whether it's on the IT security side or whether it's going to be on the HR legal side. They can provide you a lot of expertise because they are specialists in those realms per se. So once again, here's that QR code that you can basically take a look at, or just, put it in the internet, CISA regions, and it'll come up and show you your map. And of course, we can connect you with your respective advisor to come out and talk to you about today. So Ron, that concludes what I have. Once again, a lot of great discussions and topics today. And I'm here to take any questions you may have.
All right, thanks, David. Looks like we don't have any more questions, so I think you're off the hook. But thanks so much for a great presentation. Covered a lot of ground in a very short time.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, David. All right. And thank you to everyone who attended. And of course, thank you to Ameristar for supporting this event. Really appreciate that. And with that, I will say goodbye, and we'll see you during the next Vertical Insight Symposium. Thanks, everyone.